Thank you so much, Kelty, Lonnie, and Cassandra for that wonderful discussion. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Corian, Policy Counsel for State and Local Initiatives at Next Century Cities. Over the past few months, we've been working on a case study that gives an overview of the digital divide in Ohio and discusses strategies that local governments, community organizations, and the state have taken to correct longstanding disparities in broadband access and adoption. In Ohio, gaps in broadband access and adoption persist in both rural and urban areas. In urban areas, some low-income residents live only a few blocks from neighborhoods with high-speed infrastructure that has not been developed on their street. Some rural areas have home service, but it's not fast enough to reliably work and learn from home during the pandemic. These are only a few examples of the variety of challenges that Ohio communities face when it comes to digital access. Many local governments in the state are no strangers to innovative approaches to expanding broadband service and use a variety of models to fill infrastructure gaps in their community, including through fiber to the home, public wireless, and open access networks. The Ohio State Legislature and Governor's Office have been increasingly involved in broadband policy over the last 2 years, particularly as the pandemic revealed the importance of maintaining a home broadband connection. Increased state involvement creates tremendous opportunity for new partnerships and support for local governments, but challenges remain to ensuring that state efforts are supportive of the work taking place in communities. Today, we are joined by leaders who have been outspoken about the vital role that communities play in connecting people with faster, more affordable, and more reliable broadband. This morning, Francella mentioned that when leaders in one city are fired up about broadband, that energy is contagious and all the communities they touch benefit. Our panelists today are wonderful examples of that engaging energy. Ernie Staten is the Director of Public Service for the City of Fairlawn, and his visionary ideas for improving broadband access have transformed not only his own community, but have also supported cities and other cities and counties in Ohio. Montgomery County Commissioner Debbie Lieberman is currently in her 5th term and serves on the National Association of Counties Broadband Task Force and has been outspoken about the critical importance of digital access to social equity and economic opportunity for residents. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you and to hear your stories. Ernie, could you start us off by talking a little bit about your role and what first drew your attention to the need for improved broadband access and adoption in your community?
Yeah, Corian, thank you for having me here today. And I'm glad everyone's able to watch on this because it has become a huge topic here in the state of Ohio, all the things that the legislators were trying to accomplish and obviously what we're trying to accomplish in our own communities. So I'm the service director for the city of Fairlawn, and really what that means at the end of the day is that I handle all the infrastructure for the city, everything from parks to roads to the buildings within the city. And in 2013, we realized that we were going to have to make some changes to compete with the rest of the world. And one of those changes was to bring better broadband to the city and start the utility Fairlawn gig. So that's a little bit about Fairlawn. Corian, do you want me to go into during the pandemic or?
We can touch on that a little bit later. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll make sure to get to them. Commissioner Lieberman, you've been a voice for those in Montgomery County who have been disconnected throughout the pandemic. How did digital equity make its way onto your radar and become an area of focus for you? You're on mute, sorry.
You know, you would think after all this time, I would have been ready to go with mute off, but thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. I first became concerned about digital equity long before the pandemic, but the pandemic really brought that, concern to more of a crisis, actually. We had seen that developers and businesses that wanted to come here, what they expected. And so we were, making sure that we had broadband available to some of those new, infrastructure areas that we were providing. But the spring of 2020, with the onset of COVID, it just really highlighted the digital divide in our county. And it was in ways that we'd never seen before. I guess if we would have really thought about it, we would have said, of course. But the quarantine just across the whole county. So it wasn't just in the urban and rural areas. It was across the whole county. Schools sent the students home to begin the virtual learning. Healthcare facilities ramped up with telehealth. Workplace shifted, right? I mean, we all started, and some people, so you have your iPad and your phone at home, your iPhone, but that might not have been enough. So the other thing that we really noticed was the social service agencies, including our Job and Family Services. It all became virtual those first few months. And so we knew immediately that we had to do something more for our community. Then the CARES dollars came. And, when I look back, we got the CARES dollars out as fast as we could. But one of the challenges we move forward, and maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit, is how are we going to coordinate as we move forward? Because there was a lot of good work going on, but clearly it wasn't enough. I mean, when I think about even arts and cultural trying to do everything on, virtual, so it was across everything we do, basically. So while we knew we had public availability at community centers, libraries, guess what? They were closed down too. So immediately, and I think I saw this, somebody in Kansas was doing that through what I do in NACO and paying attention. And so we set up a hotspot at our Job and Family Services that people could go there and, apply for their benefits or for unemployment or any of the things that they weren't able to do from their own home. So, as the world went into total isolation, home access to technology and reliable internet connections really went from being a luxury to a necessity. And so the work that has been done since then, I'm really proud of. Of course, it hasn't been fast enough. All the money in the world can't make it happen overnight, but we're working on it.
I'm excited to dig in a little more later on about the specifics of those programs. First, let's turn it back to Ernie for a second to talk about how the pandemic impacted Fairlawn gig residents. So even though you had municipal broadband, we know there was still a huge impact on the people living in Fairlawn. Are there any stories you would like to highlight? And you're on mute.
We're not doing so well here today. Yeah, so I have multiple stories, but I figured I would pick one of a resident and one of business and kind of an overall. So we have a resident that lives on a small road. He's handicapped, but he's an engineer. So during the pandemic, the issue that he had was leaving his house was a struggle for him. He was at home because his business at the time had sent everyone home. So as an engineer, he's got these large files that he's working on a daily basis that there's no way other than a fiber optic network that he would have been able to work on these large files. So I've heard from him throughout the entire pandemic. Now he is working from home on a regular basis, even after the business opened back up. So, it's just a great story to be able to say that we're here providing something that you would have only thought was going to be in the business setting. It's in the residential setting here. Then we have a large customer here in Fairlawn, Signet, which is the jeweler. It used to be a large jeweler here in Fairlawn, and that company sent everyone home, and they were struggling with what they needed to do, and they came up with this way to handle all this remote work, and they needed to be connected to AWS. So during the entire pandemic, they were struggling and didn't really reach out to us until getting closer to the end. And now we've connected them to AWS in Chicago, AWS in Columbus. So they have diverse ways to Amazon. Plus they're taking 100 gig package from Fairlawn because of all this remote work. They had to increase their bandwidth. So, during this pandemic where, most companies couldn't survive all the things that they needed, here we were able to give them anything that they wanted. And then in our area, we're a suburb of Akron, and the city of Akron has community centers all through the city. They have 14 of them. And during the pandemic, obviously the remote work for school children was a struggle. So Akron has a lot of areas where they're not served by the current incumbents. So they needed a way for these kids to do their schoolwork. So everyone was going to the community centers. Akron reached out to us, and now we've connected every one of the community centers for them so that the kids can do the schoolwork. And also, there's more than just kids that are going to those community centers. There's anyone that needs any type of help whatsoever. And I heard Commissioner Lieberman about all these other needs. Well, some of those needs come right out of those community centers. So it was great that we were able to connect them at all the community centers, keep schoolwork going. The pandemic really showed a lot here in Fairlawn. So we were lucky. We were already connected. We were already doing the work that I think everyone wants to see happen throughout all of these networks. But what came out of it was that it just showed how important it was to have a really strong network and a fiber optic network where the incumbents were not doing anything like that. So then lastly, one thing that I would like to say is with this COVID CARES Act money, Summit County came to us and asked us to put in a private network for their criminal justice system. So criminal justice system being everything from the jails to the judges to Summit County's internal working to the Oriana houses and any type of system that has to deal with court usage. They came to us in August, which was the CARES Act money had to be spent by December. So they didn't give us a whole lot of time, but we built a 17-mile fiber optic network that connected all 23 buildings, gave them this private network so that they could start doing arraignments from jail where they weren't bringing someone in. So they were trying to do these over Zoom, and they were having a hard time because it was two different systems. It was inferior service. So we fixed all that. And starting in January, they started having their virtual court system right here in Summit County, which quite a few counties have already done some type of court system, but that is all generally done by some incumbent provider system, where we were able to put this in for them. And again, it's 100% secure because it stays within that network. We're providing the internet that they need. We host the Zoom server for any Zoom meetings that they may have. We also handled all of the Wi-Fi within the courts. And by the way, the court system here in Summit County, they're old buildings, so Wi-Fi was not as easy to pull off as one might think. But we did it in 4 months. We were able to put that together. Saves the county roughly $750,000 a year just in transport fees, just shuttling prisoners or anyone for court to court from the jails. So, the pandemic did a lot that we didn't realize needed to happen. We have a great network, but we didn't know that there were all these struggles. And by the way, there are many struggles we still haven't handled here in the area, but slowly moving towards getting all that accomplished.
That's great. And it's great to hear about all the amazing partnerships that have come out of this really difficult time. And I know that Commissioner Lieberman, that in Montgomery County, partnerships have also been really key to success there. Could you talk a little bit about how partnerships have impacted the response to the pandemic?
Absolutely. So I kind of highlighted some of them before, but the partnerships with our schools and with our jurisdictions and our courts, we were fortunate that we, what he was just describing, we kind of already had. So the judges were able to do remote court with attorneys, but there were so many areas that we never even looked at or thought about. But as the year and a half, almost 2 years has moved on, we now are in a partnership with some of our jurisdictions. We've had some great work already happening around access, high-speed access by a nonprofit. And so we're working in there, it's a council of governments. And so we're working more with them. So they've connected kind of the southern part of the county, and now they'd like to move up. So one of our jurisdictions that doesn't really have the money, we've committed to partner with them to do that. And it's we did almost immediately a study, okay, and our digital divide study. Where are we? What do we have? And on paper, it looks okay, right? But we know that there are more partnerships to build. Of course, we've now met with and all the providers who have really come out to share with us and explain things to us. But we are continuing to work on partnerships. I know you mentioned Summit County. I know that the county itself there is doing a lot of the expansion and internet work. The infrastructure, correct me if I'm wrong, but the infrastructure is really being done by the county itself. So that was something that we all kind of around the state budget kind of all hustled and said, oh, wait a minute, Senate, don't take out all that money and don't not allow jurisdictions to own their own utility, basically. And I think, and I know you might ask this later, but I mean, we truly have to look at it. It is a utility, right? I mean, it's infrastructure. So I think almost everybody's to that point now. And then you look at what's under all that and how do we deal with all of that?
Yeah, and Commissioner Lieberman, you touched on something that I know Ernie has been very passionate about, which is getting the state legislature on board with being more supportive of communities. So if funding was available from the state and if the state was more supportive of local efforts, what would be possible in Fairlawn and in other counties and cities in the state?
Well, I think what we're doing, there's no limit to what we're accomplishing here. So I would tell you that if the state were to open up and realize what's going on in these communities and embrace that, allow for funding with communities, we could change the entire outlook of the state of Ohio. So when we started this, and things have changed a little bit, but when we started this, Ohio was 48th out of 50 states in the country with broadband access. It's changed. Last I saw, it's at about 26, and we hope that we've had something to do with that a little bit along the way. But still, 26th. So when people are worried about us being a flyover state, they're not helping with the flyover idea because we're 26th in the country. So that by them opening this up and allowing for funding, and it hasn't happened yet, but I do believe that it will change. I believe the governor is very behind this, even if all the legislators are not 100% behind it. I think what it will do is it will just make us compete with the rest of the world and compete with the rest of the country. We will look a little more like the East Coast and West Coast. Right now, people don't look at Ohio the same way. One of the big reasons why we started it was the mayor would go overseas to trade shows, and at those trade shows, he would hear boy, the water is abundant there. The land is cheap. It looks like you have talent, but you don't have any internet. You don't have fiber optics. So we couldn't compete with anyone at that time. And now at least we're having a discussion. But the state needs to understand that they need to embrace that. And embracing it is a full gamut. It can't just be embracing the incumbents or embracing cities only. It needs to be everything. So I have no real issue with the incumbents personally. We've always had a good relationship, even if we're competing against one another. But it can't just be all the money going to them. It has to go to the cities. And you see, I mean, I think I saw 32 communities that are truly doing something like what we're doing here in the state. You can see that there are people trying to make a difference and they're being held back. I just had a discussion today with Summit County about the idea of maybe saying Summit County should up our speeds to say 300 by 300 as a minimum. Okay. Well, the state of Ohio is relying on the old idea of 25 and 3, and the federal government has already come out and said it needs to be at least 100 by 100. So it's amazing that the state is falling a little behind here and then keeping it behind. So I believe, I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you that I believe that it's limitless what we're doing. So if they opened up the funding, all those limitless ideas could come to fruition.
I totally agree. You know, we play on words here, but it's so broad, right? I mean, we talk about equity, we talk about rural and urban and economic development, and it all fits together. Speed, fiber networks. It's so important. And I agree with you that the governor, and specifically the lieutenant governor, who has taken broadband on as one of his pillar issues, they get it. And you're right. And Jobs Ohio gets it. We are being left behind. And so all these dollars, we have to figure out how do they work together? You know, the new dollars, the new infrastructure dollars, any other ARPA dollars, how are we going to work it all together? And so we've had some good discussions with the governor and his team about, please, let's have a plan. And so I did mention that we're actually, so we did, and I will put this online, we did our first digital equity study. And the next step is we're going to do a all-encompassing strategy, to have a real strategy, especially as the money that isn't going to have to be spent like the CARES dollars were immediately, right? So we want to take our time and make sure we're doing the right thing. So we're going out for an RFP. The other thing I want to share, and I'll make sure it somehow gets either to everybody or in the chat, I did mention I was on the National Association of Counties Broadband Task Force, and our report is now out. And it's not specific to Ohio, but I think it really affects all of us. And, you know, we know it's not cheap. And we know Montgomery County, just to let you know how much we have already invested through our CARES dollars. We did a $300,000 contract with a provider for our Boys and Girls Club and 5 of our affordable housing neighborhoods who had no drops, nothing. So we were able to give 1,000 people the drops and Chromebooks. And then we also spent with Dayton Public Schools. We spent $1.4 million with Dayton Public Schools for hotspots and Chromebooks. They were going, at one point they had buses going into the neighborhoods with hotspots. So many kids, and that's urban, right? Rural had same issues because we're a county, about a third of it's rural, of our 540,000 people. We also, through our educational service group, we spent $1.1 million on hotspots and $2.1 million on Chromebooks. So, and that was just a tiny drop in the county need. So this is great. I hope we all continue to have these conversations like this because it's so important.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that. And if you have the link to the report, we'd love to share it on social media in summary.
Yep. Yep.
We did get one question in the chat. So Ernie, I know you talked about connecting Akron and Summit County. Are there any other communities that have sort of been on your radar to work with? The question is, what have you been doing to connect up folks outside of the municipality, and do other townships care?
Well, so what we're working on right at the moment is, and we were working on this, actually, Debbie already kind of mentioned something about it. We've been working with Summit County, and before everything happened at the state, our intent was to take the ARPA money and use a large share of it, somewhere around $30 million, to build a ring around the entire county, connecting all 31 communities. So that's still the plan. It's not as much about broadband. It's going to be used for broadband, but what the real intent behind it was, we need some type of a safety system here in Summit County. So this would connect all the communities, and then through a broadband, depending on what each community wants to do, then they could have their own utility. They could be connected. If they want just to be connected as government, at least they would have a spot at our data center to have offsite storage, and they could get internet from Fairlawn Gig. They could kind of almost go off grid. So the pandemic, obviously we didn't need to go off grid, but right at the end of the pandemic, we had that major problem on the East Coast where the pipeline, there was a big problem there, and the communities around there had an issue. So this would be a way that our thought was, we need to be able to go off of the main grid if something bad were to happen in the world. So it's going to be safety. They will be able to take advantage of broadband. So hopefully what comes out of that is a lot of communities actually contract with Fairlawn to go around and get service to their local community. One area that we are really working hard at is the whole idea of the underserved areas. So we have quite a few areas in Akron that are underserved, and we want to make sure that we get something there. So that'd be part of what we're doing with this ring, and then that safety piece. So that's really what we're working more towards. Now, I would tell you that on a daily basis, I get 3 or 4 calls from communities around the state wanting to know, is there a way that we can get connected together, or can you help us through trying to start our own utility? So we're always working on something, but right at the moment, it is really focused on getting this middle mile ring here in Summit County.
Yeah, and I see there's a follow-up question on that about what the plan is for the last mile once the middle mile is built.
Yeah, so in the state, every municipality has the right to form their own utility. So that's how we're approaching this. We're saying each community, if you want to form a utility, we have no issue with managing that utility, but it would be a little strange for any city to go around and have a utility and kind of force it into communities. So we're trying to work with them that, do you want this? Now, if it turns out that they don't want anything to do with the utility, and there are obviously areas that need help, then I think Fairlawn's going to step in and help. I know Summit County is, really wants to be involved in something like that. And every county has a few struggles with jurisdictions. So like we have AMHA, the Akron Housing, that is in almost every community. So who's taking care of them, or the school systems that go beyond the jurisdiction? How is that going to be taken care of? So that's why the county really needs to be in charge of something like this, because their jurisdiction handles all of those issues, or the library system or something like that. It goes outside of everyone's jurisdiction. So the county will really kind of own this middle mile, and Fairlawn will manage it for them, and then potentially manage utilities in all the local areas.
And I think that's a great idea. It's not something we're pursuing yet because I talked earlier about that nonprofit cog that's doing that. But one of the things that this in the budget bill that just passed, the Senate wanted to take that out. And it just shows how strong some of our providers can be lobbying. And so we just have to stay, as jurisdictions, we have to be just as strong and say, it's not how it's going to work, because we have a lot of providers who all want a piece of the future, right? And like, but we have to, again, I talked about having a plan earlier. I mean, that's going to be so important for jurisdictions, counties, regions, and the whole state. So we want to do this right. We don't. It's that saying, dig once. I mean, we really have to do this right. And so I appreciate the work that you're already doing there. And we're gonna continue on this path because it's critical. Again, it's a utility. It's infrastructure. So thanks for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you. And this is our last question because we only have 2 minutes left, but if in 1 minute, could you talk about the role that broadband plays in agriculture and promoting food security in the future?
I can start with that because I recently was at a Farm Bureau meeting. As I said, about a third of our county is still rural. And those businesses, those farm businesses need just as much access as other folks. I also, in our meeting were some of the Future Farmers of America students. And I said, how'd you guys do? They said, we had no access. So we know there were kids that in our inner city and those jurisdictions, some townships, and that we lost. But there were also rural kids that they didn't have the opportunity to go online. Maybe they had a cell phone, but it's really hard to, do your work on a cell phone. So we saw that it really hurt. And as far as the food, and initially getting the word out. How do you get the word out? How do you interact with people? But we have a whole food security strategy and a task force that works around that. But yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. It's not just rural. It's not just urban. All of us.
So much.
I don't have the rural area here, but I actually live in a rural area. It's kind of funny. I have a farm, but one thing that I would say is I've seen over the last probably 10 years that rural has really, that's where the money has been going, is rural. And what we see, just because of the city of Akron, we see there's a lot of urban that needs to be taken care of. So that really, it needs to become more of a balancing act. And again, that's probably where it makes the most sense that just allow cities to partake in the funding so that you can take care of both areas.
That's great. Thank you both so much for being here today. I see that we're out of time, but I wish I could talk to you all day because these are such great stories. And I hope that those in the audience will check out the case study when we release it in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much.
And I'll send those links in a few minutes in the chat, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can do it.